Jerry, I want to ask you, we are gripped by global warming. The planet is getting hotter and hotter. So the conclusion would be that there's a polar ice cap over Antarctica. And if it melts, what happens?
Well, I mean, I'm sure wildlife is affected by it up there, but also warming.
The oceans rise.
The oceans rise.
The Pacific Islands are inundated. The Tongans flee for safety. But guess what?
Are they worried?
Well, we'll tell you today, is that polar ice cap shrinking or expanding? And if it's expanding, then it ain't getting hotter.
Yeah.
If it's shrinking...
There's so much controversy over this.
We'll have a story on that. And
I wait with bated breath.
Your controversy will be settled. Well, as we told you in this program, it's getting heated up in the Middle East. There's just no way that those guys over there in Gaza can dump 100, 120 missiles a day against Israel and not have something happen. So war may be coming to the Holy Land. Israel has launched a military offensive against Hamas to stop its barrage of rocket attacks against Israeli citizens, especially into Beersheba.
Well, Israel's also called up some of its army reserves for a possible ground invasion. Chris Mitchell brings us the story from the border of Israel and Gaza.
Over the past few weeks, more than 200 rockets have slammed into southern Israel from Gaza. Sirens have been heard in Tel Aviv and near Jerusalem. That puts nearly 2 million Israelis in rocket range. The front line of this battle is Gaza City. We can hear right now the IAF is striking targets here in Gaza City. That's where many of the rockets from Hamas have been fired from. And now you can see the plume of smoke in the distance where they're responding. Israel says it's hit dozens of Hamas targets to stop the rockets into Israel. For Israelis living under the shadow of these attacks, it can be terrifying.
Even when everything seems to be quiet, you have to be ready from your inside that maybe in a couple of minutes you will hear the alarm, and then you have 10 seconds to save your life, to run to a shelter, and it's crazy.
We definitely expect this to escalate. We should be expecting today sirens going off, I would say, in Tel Aviv region.
Noam Badin of the Sderot Media Center says there's a major difference between the way Hamas fires its rockets and how Israel responds.
Hamas are firing these rockets towards the civilian populations in the western Negev or Israeli population in southern Israel. When Israel tries to retaliate, it uses the most advanced technology and air forces with the purpose to pinpoint that target itself in Gaza, never the population.
Israel's Air Force commander estimates Hamas has fired 97% of their rockets out of population centers. Israel says its actions are justified.
At present, with the range of their rockets improving, Hamas has managed to force 1 million Israelis into shelters. The government of Israel will not tolerate that situation continuing.
The U.S. State Department said Israel has the right to defend itself, and we certainly support that.
There is no country in the world that will tolerate even one rocket being fired towards a territory.
From this vantage point, you can watch Hamas fire its rockets and then see the Israeli Air Force strike back. The concern for many is that this is the front lines of what could be a much wider confrontation. Chris Mitchell, CBN News, on the Israeli-Gaza border.
Thanks, Chris. It was folly when the Israelis gave up Gaza in the so-called peace move. It was not a smart move, and it's been a troubling spot ever since. That thing is seething with hatred, and it's just not settled. But just imagine, folks, what it would be like. Let's assume that you live in Detroit or Buffalo, and every day there are 100 rockets coming in from Canada. What will we do? Well, I tell you what we'd do. We'd start a war. We wouldn't take that for 1 minute, and yet we expect the Israelis to just grin and bear it. Well, they're not going to grin and bear it any longer. But what these people do, they hide in civilian emplacements, and then they have mobile launchers, and when they get through firing a few rockets, and they pick up and run to someplace else, and again, in the middle of civilians. It's terrible. Well, here at home, there's an untold story on the immigration crisis in Texas. John Jessup has more on that from Washington. Here's John.
Pat, some churches in Texas are frustrated because they want to help the flood of young immigrant children that have crossed the border, but they're still waiting to hear just how the federal government will use them. Their hope is that they'll soon be able to minister directly to these kids. And Heather Sells brings us that story from McAllen, Texas.
Many Texas churches have known for months about the tidal wave of immigrant children crossing the border. Already this year, Border Patrol agents have detained more than 50,000.
Children as young as 6 are crossing the border here on their own, spurred on in many cases by parents who fear for their lives back home in Central America.
At their annual state meeting this month, Hispanic Baptist leaders took time out to pray at the border. Their concern, the safety and salvation of these kids. Their frustration, no way to connect with or minister to them. The hope that ongoing conversation with the White House will lead to that access.
We have an army of chaplains. We have an army of disaster relief trained people. We have an army of children's ministers and leaders who have background checks, who are ready.
In the border town of McAllen, Pastor Chad Mason works the phones daily, trying to find ways to help these children and fielding calls from churches that want to help. He knows firsthand the need because many Border Patrol agents worship at his church.
They tell us the stories of kids who are in their care, who are traumatized from what they've seen, or they're incredibly impoverished. And you just wonder, well, how are you dealing with that? Because we know the Border Patrol is not designed to be a child care facility.
Right now, Border Patrol agents are detaining kids for as many as 14 days, a condition human rights activists say is unacceptable. By law, however, agents cannot quickly return children from Central America back to their home countries. They must screen them as potential trafficking victims or refugees. That leaves thousands of kids stranded in Border Patrol stations for days, and after that, in Health and Human Service facilities for possibly months.
That's what breaks our hearts. We know that there's a need. And at this point, we have no access to try to care for that need.
One way that churches right now are helping is by simply doing laundry. This bedding here is for women and children who are just coming from Border Patrol stations and are about to head out on buses to wherever their destination is.
The Border Patrol releases immigrant women with their children at bus stations across South Texas. With their deportation hearings months away, they're free to go for now, though by some estimates, huge numbers of them will never show up. Calvary Baptist and other churches are working with Catholic Charities to care for these families. They're often in dire need of medical care and clean clothes.
We don't foresee this ending anytime very soon.
This week, the National Hispanic Christian Leadership Conference is telling Central American parents, keep your kids at home. The concern, unaccompanied children here could fall victim to the same drug gangs that threaten them in their countries. In the meantime, Texas churches are standing by, ready to help those who do decide to come.
In the future, we'll have to figure out what's right, what's wrong, and those kinds of things. But biblically, we're going to love people right now. We need to share that love and compassion to those who need it the most.
Reporting in McAllen, Texas, Heather Sells, CBN News.
The amount of Antarctic sea ice reached an all-time high last week. The London Daily Mail reports that confounds climate change computer models that say the amount of ice there should be on the decline and not increasing. According to the National Snow and Ice Data Center, the ice around the southern continent covers about 6.2 million square miles. That's about 800,000 more than normal at this time of year. The Daily Mail says that means an area the size of Greenland, which would normally be open water, is now frozen over. And Pat, that warmth seems to contradict another NASA study that was published earlier this year that said the polar ice caps were melting at an unstoppable rate.
You don't know who to believe, but I really believe that at this point of time, anybody who says the science of global warming is flawed, he's labeled, he's labeled as a climate denier, and he will be excluded from faculty appointments in universities. He will not be allowed to lecture because that is the prevailing wisdom of the politically correct crowd. But the truth is, the climate isn't getting warmer. We're having one of the coldest decades in 50, 100 years. And so that's probably good news. But nevertheless, those who have wrung their hands, they've staked their entire careers on the fact that things are getting hotter. And it's all being caused by pollution, and it's caused by cars, and it's caused by coal, and it's caused by all these terrible things we humans do to the planet. Those people, it's a political agenda, ladies and gentlemen. I don't want to pollute the environment any more than you do. But at the same time, you can't have somebody trying to get a political agenda which says, I want to have more government control over the industrial base of our society. And that's what this is all about. It is socialism with a different face. And the prevailing wisdom, though, Antarctic turned it on its ear. John?
Pat, turning to health news, the main reason more people are obese may be that they're less active, and not because they're eating more. Researchers from Stanford University looked over national health survey results spanning more than 20 years and found that people weren't eating more now, but they do have more leisure time on their hands than before. And in that same period of time, starting in the late 1980s, far more Americans have become obese. The study can't say whether inactivity is the cause of weight gain, but experts say staying active and exercise are important to maintaining a healthy weight along with a healthy diet. And Pat, it's safe to assume that inactivity and weight gain probably has a lot to do with new technologies that didn't exist before.
Well, I think high fructose corn syrup into everything. My wife uncovered a container of a drink that said it was called Splash, and it was made out of fruit juices, and it looked so healthy. But her husband read the label. You try to teach people, read the
labels,
and
yes.
guess what it said on the label? High off the top.
High fructose corn
You
syrup.
got it.
And it's put on there in the order in which the highest concentration
That's right.
is
That's
in it.
right.
So you really do have to label read today.
You think, hey, I'm getting a healthy juice from a well-known company, and aren't they being nice to have this nice, healthy product?
They care about you so much.
They care about me so much they want me to get fat. But it's really disgusting what's happening. I mean, it really is getting bad.
Well, I do think there's something to what was just reported on as well, that we are sitting more, you know, and
sure.
even when we go home, we're on cell phones and technology, and so...
I'm sure sooner or later they'll get a nice treadmill for me, and I don't want it. I like sitting here. It's kind of nice. All right.
The oldest person in America says trusting in the Lord is a key reason for living so long. Gertrude Weaver of Arkansas turned 116 on the 4th of July. She spent her birthday at home at Silver Oaks Health and Rehabilitation in Camden, about 100 miles southwest of Little Rock. Weaver gives 3 reasons for her longevity: trusting in the Lord, hard work, and loving everybody. And she says you have to follow God. Don't follow anyone else. American soccer player Tim Howard got a lot of attention for his fantastic goalkeeping last week. He had a record 16 saves, and the U.S. lost to Belgium. Howard is a Christian, and the Huffington Post reports that after he was diagnosed with a neurological disorder at age 11, he turned to his grandmother for help. She got her strength from the Lord and helped Howard understand God's love for him. He says if all his soccer success went away tomorrow, he would still have the peace that Jesus gives. And you can find out more about this story and always get the latest from CBN News by going to our website at cbnnews.com.